Imagine for a moment that the Russian Federation, under Vladimir Putin's rule, reaches a breaking point. It's not an easy vision to conjure. Despite facing extensive Western sanctions, battlefield stalemates, and internal dissent, the Kremlin still maintains tight control over its vast territory, economy, and military. But let's push the boundaries of current reality. What if Putin's regime were to capitulate, not because of a military rout, but under unbearable internal and external pressure? A white flag raised over Moscow would send shockwaves far beyond Eastern Europe. The first to rise may not be Russian liberals, but hardliners and loyalists who view retreat as betrayal. Putin himself, a former KGB officer and master of power consolidation, knows this. Stepping down would risk his life and legacy, as history's lessons, particularly those of the Romanovs, linger ominously. Even if Putin wanted to step back, he's cornered. There's no clear battlefield triumph he can claim. Ukraine's industrial heartlands remain contested. Russia's naval ambitions are hemmed in on every front, from the Bosphorus Strait to the Pacific. Europe is chipping away at its energy dependence on Russia, slowly diffusing the one card Moscow had left. Washington, meanwhile, continues to tighten sanctions like a noose, not loosening them even as the war drags on. There's no appetite for mercy. The US knows that strategic weakness invites risk, and a defeated Russia could be more dangerous than a defiant one. Forcing Putin out? It sounds satisfying to some Western ears, but it could spark a coup, not the liberal revolution of wishful thinking, but an elite power struggle steeped in blood and betrayal. After 2 decades of eradicating dissent, Putin has built a fortress of loyalists, silencing opposition and turning institutions into loyal instruments. Moreover, the Russian state rests on a foundation of centralized control over resources, especially energy and agriculture. The Kremlin governs a landmass larger than any nation, with vast uninhabited zones and the world's largest nuclear arsenal. Russia's fall wouldn't be an elegant disassembly, it would be a geopolitical detonation. And unlike the Soviet Union, which dissolved through a negotiated legal process among 15 republics, today's Russian Federation is different. It is 77% ethnically Russian. Its political and social fabric is far more cohesive. Any move toward fragmentation would meet not just constitutional resistance but also overwhelming military force. And more crucially, Moscow retains something less tangible but more potent: the memory of the 1990s, the economic freefall, the chaos, and the humiliation. For many Russians, Western-backed freedom means hunger and instability. They're not likely to embrace it again. Even more terrifying is the nuclear question. When the USSR collapsed, its nuclear weapons passed cleanly into Russian hands. But a chaotic Russian disintegration today would scatter warheads across Siberia and the Arctic. Control could fall to rogue commanders, or worse, disappear altogether. The black market would salivate. One can easily imagine a future where non-state actors possess nuclear material, threatening New York or London. That's not fantasy, it's a security analyst's worst-case scenario. This is why, despite its loud rhetoric, the West has never dared to truly push Russia to the edge. What if Russia falls? It's a Pandora's box with no lid. A cascade of uncertainty looms: economic collapse, mass migration, regional wars, and yes, nuclear insecurity. The West talks tough, but its actions betray a deeper caution. The reality is clear. The collapse of Russia would be a crisis of civilization, not a geopolitical win. And then comes the question everyone's asking: what would China do? There's no doubt that pressure on China would intensify. Yet China is not Russia. Taiwan is not Ukraine. The parallels fall apart under close scrutiny. China commands a diversified economy, a massive industrial base, global trading networks, and a military undergoing rapid modernization. It is not isolated, it is deeply embedded in the global economy.
Unlike Russia, which relies heavily on oil, gas, and raw exports, China's power comes from a complex engine, advanced manufacturing, a colossal workforce, innovation ecosystems, and deep supply chain entanglements. Its military isn't confined by frozen ports. China's coastline stretches over 18,000 kilometers, dotted with deep water, ice-free harbors. The so-called first and second island chains, while strategically important, are not impenetrable. With growing naval capabilities, China has effectively neutralized many of the traditional maritime choke points. Furthermore, Beijing is not as vulnerable as Moscow in terms of logistics or internal cohesion. Its strategic energy planning is already diversified. While oil remains a weak point, domestic production covers only a third of demand. China has quietly built one of the most robust energy security programs in the world. Strategic reserves are expanding, imports are diversified, and investments in green energy, nuclear power, and ultra-high-voltage transmission have placed it years ahead of many developed countries. Coal remains abundant, and domestic gas production, combined with pipelines from Central Asia, ensures a baseline of energy resilience even in extreme crises. Even in food security, China leads in preparation. With more than 98% self-sufficiency in staple crops, deep strategic grain reserves, and advanced logistics, a blockade would be painful but not existential. When Western analysts predict Chinese collapse under pressure, they often underestimate its institutional capacity and long-term planning. Meanwhile, technologies like battery-powered logistics and nationwide high-speed rail reduce China's dependency on fossil fuels dramatically. As for military confrontation, the Taiwan Strait is only 130 kilometers wide. China's missile capabilities and naval presence make foreign intervention logistically daunting. American bases in the region are within missile range. Supplying Taiwan militarily would be a nightmare scenario for the West, fraught with risk, cost, and limited reward. The old European powers would hardly have the will or capacity to deploy meaningfully into the Asia-Pacific. In summary, the United States and China are the only two true players left at the grand geopolitical table. Russia, for all its historical gravity, is no longer a peer. Aside from nuclear weapons, Russia trails in nearly every metric: GDP, technology, manpower, or global market relevance. The myth of Russia as the world's third power lingers, but it's an illusion born from past grandeur. A war in Ukraine has exposed those fault lines clearly. So rather than obsessing over whether the Russian bear will fall, it's time to focus on the tectonic plates beneath our feet. China's rise is not just a reshuffling of global economic rankings, it poses a multifaceted threat to the international order. Militarily, Beijing has rapidly modernized its forces, expanding its navy beyond regional dominance and testing weapons designed to cripple U.S. assets in space and cyberspace. It's building bases across the Indian Ocean, intimidating neighbors in the South China Sea, and rehearsing blockades around Taiwan. Diplomatically, China is eroding Western influence by offering authoritarian-friendly loans through its Belt and Road Initiative, while undermining multilateral institutions with parallel, China-centric alternatives. Economically, Beijing wields coercion as a weapon, punishing nations that challenge its policies with sudden trade embargoes or investment withdrawals. Technologically, it is racing to control critical supply chains, from semiconductors to rare earth minerals. And using state-subsidized giants like Huawei to embed surveillance architecture across the globe. Perhaps most concerning, China exports a model of digital authoritarianism, combining AI, mass data collection, and censorship, offering dictators a turnkey system of control. The democratic world must respond with a mix of resilience and resolve. That means investing in domestic innovation, forging stronger tech alliances, securing energy and resource supply chains, and rearming not just militaries, but democracies themselves, against the quiet spread of authoritarian influence. NATO must expand its vision beyond the Atlantic, building deeper ties with Indo-Pacific partners. Trade policy must reward allies and penalize enablers of aggression. Most of all, the West must abandon complacency. China's rise is not inevitable, but its challenge is real. The future of the international order depends not on wishful thinking, but on the choices free nations make today.